What's going on today, guys? So it's hot, and I have you can tell by my hair, and it's late in the day, and I just want to go ahead and give a shout out to OJ because he's prompted this video. I was as you can tell from the beginning, I was a police officer for a long time, so I dealt directly with domestic violence and domestic assault. It's a very serious issue, so I don't want to make light of that. But I will say, as you see in this presentation, that a lot of, for better or worse, the changes in the domestic violence and domestic law statutes in most states can be, I think, attributed to O.J. Simpson. So here's the deal. So today we're talking about domestic assault. So, and a lot of this is specific, again, to Tennessee law, but there are variations depending on what state you're in of how this may be construed, but I'm sure there are also similarities. So as always, seek out a counsel, an attorney in your area that is licensed and competent in the practice of the law if you're accused of these type of crimes. So first of all, the problem, and I don't want to say it's a problem, but when I was a cop, the reason so many people are arrested on domestic assault partially is the cops are encouraged to make an arrest on a domestic assault. The statute says that the law says that if the police can determine who the primary aggressor was, it's kind of like who started it, then they usually make an arrest. Matter of fact, it says the encouraged response is arrest. So the officer always kind of has discretion on whether or not someone goes to jail, but the danger was that pre-O.J. Simpson, anything involving a dispute between family members or people that were domestic partners, a lot of times was allowed to just kind of work its way out, because a lot of times these people get in disagreements. Now, obviously, they shouldn't get into violent disagreements, but there are arguments that can get heated. And as tempers cool, a lot of times they work things out on their own. Well, then comes the O.J. Simpson issue in the late 90s. And the problem with that was, if you remember the specifics, I think the cops have been called a few times and kind of was going to let it work out, whether or not it was because it was O.J. Simpson or what. And then, of course, there were these murders, and, of course, he was the primary suspect in those, and he was acquitted. But after that, the laws in most states changed on domestic incidents to encourage the police to make an arrest, to prevent things like the O.J. Simpson thing from happening, arguably. So that's something that, again, thanks O.J. He managed to change the law. The reason I bring him up is today I think he was up on probation, up for potential release, and I hadn't even seen what the outcome was yet. I've been so busy, but he was up for a potential release on, I think it was like burglary charges or something he's been in on. But anyway, so it kind of relates to what we're talking about. So, the first thing is when the cops show up, they try to determine the primary aggressor, so they talk to the parties. If there's clear evidence one way or the other, like physical evidence, like somebody's been hit or they're cut up or beat up, or, if one person has defensive wounds where it looks like they were defending themselves, the police are supposed to take all that in consideration in making their decision. Keep in mind, too, that all the cops need is probable cause to arrest somebody. It's a very low burden. So it's not that they have to convict you or prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the suspect they arrest just 100% did it. They just have to have evidence that would make a reasonable person believe that it might have happened. And sometimes that can even be a witness statement. So if one alleged victim writes a statement, a lot of times that's enough at least for the officer to act and make an arrest. On the other side now, as a defense attorney, I wish I had thought this through a little bit. At the time, the cops are just trying to keep the peace. So people get really angry when they do these arrests, especially in situations where people do lie. I mean, that happens. Victims lie, defendants lie, people lie all the time. And that's something that I think the police might want to keep a little more in the back of their mind, that it does happen. They know it happens, but their primary job is to keep the peace. And since the burden that they have to carry is so low, a lot of times the easy thing is really arrest. Lock them up. You don't have to worry about coming back out there. They get credit for the arrest, the stats and whatnot. So sometimes that's, I think, why that's the route that they end up taking. Plus, like I said, the law encourages it. So their hands are tied in a lot of ways. So basically, under the TCA code 3913.111, basically that outlines who falls under as a domestic partner, because really, when you're charged with domestic assault, you're charged with assault, but it has an enhancement of domestic based on who the victim is. So if the victim's related to you by blood, marriage, and that's past or present, or if you've cohabitated with them, it means you've been a roommate, you lived with them, even a college roommate, arguably, um, or if you've dated them, or if you've fornicated. You don't want to do any of that's terrible. If there's ever been any fornication, then then that person is a domestic partner, and you can have the enhancement of domestic assault as the charge. And there are other things that come up when somebody's charged with domestic. For example, if you're convicted of a domestic assault, it carries penalties similar to like being convicted of a felony. You can't own firearms anymore. You can't even have a bullet if you're convicted of it. Plus, obviously, you can face jail time and a lot of costs and having to pay us and things to defend it. So there's a lot of, I don't want to say penalties, but risks that comes with the charge of domestic assault. And so, one of the questions people have is what to do. Well, obviously, you need to call the cops. I would say the first thing to do is, definitely try to be mindful of how arguments escalate. And there's some people that, I guess think it's okay to hit people, and that's never accurate. I mean, I've trained in martial arts my whole life, and I actually think I have pretty good self-control and like to think I haven't hit anybody unless they needed it. But I definitely haven't hit a wife before or anything like that. So, when you get into arguments, if they get heated and you have an anger issue, then you need to learn to step back. There are even classes that you can take that help with that. And I recommend if you have an anger issue that you need to, take some initiative and go ahead and, maybe get some assistance with that issue, especially before it blows into something like this. I think the biggest thing for all the parties involved in a domestic is if things start to escalate, you need to, try to separate and calm down. Obviously, if you ever feel threatened, anybody that's in a situation that they feel their health or their life is at risk, you should call the police. You should get some assistance or call somebody at least. But I think also we need to be realistic, and everybody needs to understand that people express anger differently. And if you've never been harmed by someone before and they're getting angry, if it's an option to just split, then do that. I'd also warn people of this. I've had a lot of clients that come in and have been arrested because there wasn't physical violence, but they were still arrested. Remember the primary aggressor. If they can determine you're a primary aggressor, there's a strong possibility that, you would go to jail. And then also, like when I was a police officer, I would arrest people for stuff like taking a phone. Back in the day, before cell phones, if you destroyed a phone, then that person had no way to call for help if they needed it. We, at the time at least, viewed that as domestic assault. Not exactly in the statute, but the cop might still consider things like that domestic assault, or pulling the starter off the car, throwing the keys into the woods, or things like this that kind of makes you the primary aggressor of the altercation. Just be smart and don't do those kind of things. You can also get enhancements under the law. It's just like an aggravated assault is an enhanced assault over a simple assault. Well, you can get an aggravated domestic assault. In Tennessee, it's a big deal now with strangulation. If at any point the hands have gone near or even around the throat of the victim, they charge it as aggravated assault, and clearly that's going to have higher penalties than and potentially be harder to fight than the regular assault. So you need to keep all of that in mind when, the point of this video was not to tell anybody how to get out of a domestic assault. Obviously we will pose defenses, assuming that there are defenses available for you. But my hope is that you'll understand what domestic assault is, and what domestic violence is, and really take at least the advice I'm saying about if you have some anger issues, then seek it out. And hey, if you have been a victim of domestic assault, or if you're in a relationship right now that's abusive, obviously you need to get out of that. However, I'm not you. You may feel stuck. I don't know. You love the person, whatever. But come get some training. It doesn't have to be at my martial arts school. Besides the law practice, I have a martial arts school that I still go and teach at, and I have a lot of very powerful women that train there. Men can be victims of domestic assault too, but most people traditionally think that it's the woman. My wife, for example, has knocked me out before. She's a kickboxing world champion. Very proud of her, and she would love to teach anyone to come in, and we can both teach you whatever about self-defense. We even do self-defense seminars. But you need to do what you need to do to empower yourself. If you got anger issues, then seek out some assistance with that. If you don't know, how to defend yourself, then maybe get some solace on that. But don't stay in an abusive relationship. Everybody deserves to be happy, and if you're with an abuser, they're probably not happy either. So don't feel like you're doing them a favor or the kids a favor. It's not good to stay in that kind of relationship with the kids. Think about what you're teaching them to live with. So do what you got to do to mitigate that. But also, if you get upset with somebody, don't use the cops against them. Don't think, oh, I'm going to get them. I'm going to call the cops and say whatever. That's just as shady. You don't need to do that kind of stuff either. The cops definitely serve a purpose, but this is potentially the father or mother of children you have, and that's just not very respectful to your children or to them to try to use the police to control the situation. And that's a lot of times I think what happens when things escalate so bad. Someone's lost control somehow and is used to having control, and now it's a huge issue. So just keep all that in mind. I appreciate you guys watching these videos. I hope sometimes they're helpful. If they are or not, just let me know. Send me a message or something. Or if you'd like me to talk on a specific subject, I'd be happy to do that. If you want to hear more about O.J. Simpson, please subscribe and like the videos. Please share the content if you like. The more that you do, then the more I know kind of what you guys are paying attention to. And then, of course, if you ever need any assistance in Tennessee or Arkansas, you can call one of the numbers below or send us an email or something. We'd be glad to assist you. So thanks for your time, and shout out to OJ.